for the Family Feud
on ABC's Monday Night Baseball.
Mickey Spillane's Mike Evans.
whatever.
There's only room for one king of the hill around here, Catherine. And I'm it.
Never before in any society anywhere has there been anything like television. It's a whole parallel world living along with the real world 24 hours a day. In 35 years, it has become a condition of being. We depend on TV for perception, as we depend on air for breath.
This is Sam Donaldson at the White House.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
We're going to take those two big elements of American life, show business and politics, and we're going to attempt to show you how television coverage puts them together in a blender so that by the end, they are no longer distinguishable.
And now the star of this show, dramatic supporting role.
Center stage.
Not ready for prime time.
Television, show business,
Auditioning.
Public persona.
Class study.
Star.
Reagan is our projected winner.
This charge of media manipulation somehow, whether intentional or otherwise, of political campaigns is just so much malarkey.
What would happen if they got out there on that floor tonight or tomorrow and said, it's got to be Gerald Ford?
Co-presidency. The deal has been cut.
I am just being told by a high lieutenant that the choice is Bush.
Well, who's writing the script for this one? That's what I want to know.
The media conceives of an image, and then you have to, everything you do and say has to fit that image.
It was one of the most unusual phone calls ever made from Air Force One.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
There's no business like show, business like no, business I know.
I think our power is vastly overestimated. Vastly overestimated.
And the TV commentator would be explaining to the public either what I said or what I should have said or what the commentator thinks I should have said.
The Democratic incumbent, having just recovered from a bout of laryngitis, went jogging in a freezing rainstorm just after dawn.
This is an ABC News special. The Iran crisis. America held hostage.
Look at this. Are you seriously asking me whether we tried to keep the hostage crisis going in order to put on a broadcast that would be commercially successful?
all this BS about journalism, journalism isn't what carries the day in these news departments. It's dollars, and dollars translate with ratings.
Is our national politics nothing more than a big screen TV performance? Does the TV box really control this box? Well, that was the simple act of voting that helps keep our democracy alive. But only 54% of eligible voters in the U.S. actually vote today. That's both odd and sad. And every one of us who does vote, votes under the influence of American commercial television. The tube is the main source of information for 2/3 of us. The TV set is on in the average American home for 7¼ hours a day. TV talks to us more than we talk to each other. We live in a made-for-TV world, and we don't even notice it anymore. Tonight, we're going to ask you to notice. We're going to take the presidential election of 1980 when Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter It's not too recent, but it's not too long ago. And there were many fascinating features that made it a particularly good show. As we look at it together, we're going to ask you to think of the TV coverage of that campaign, not as news, but as show business. The made-for-TV election, candidates cast and tested in such a way, real events handled and timed in such a way, edited in such a way, dropped or included in such a way, that candidates and real events emerge as television theater.
From CBS News election headquarters in New York, here is Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. That was a jubilant Jimmy Carter.
They call themselves surrogates. Many of them are capable journalists. But from now on in this program, try to think of them as performers, actors playing a role, just like I am now. You may think they're just being themselves. The communicator role may be true enough, but it is always tailored to the needs of TV. And like actors, they all have a powerful sense of performance. There is not a dud in the cast. They all are TV stars, consummate actors performing in their roles. They test well. And in 1980, their credibility was frequently higher than the sitting president, James Earl Carter. We begin with what they used to call in vaudeville days a curtain raiser, more formally a prologue. In January 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini interrupts Iranian oil exports. Soon after, OPEC more than doubles oil prices and inflation skyrockets. By May, a small gasoline shortfall, only 3%, is felt in the United States. Carter keeps talking conservation, but TV shows the entire country what is beginning in California: gas lines. There is a gas shortage, a 3% shortage. That is reality. The pictures of gas lines are real. But then a TV reality takes over, amplified and compounded by editing and repetition. The endless repetition has an effect. A panic ripples across the nation. Everybody starts to top off the gas tank, and then there is a real shortage. TV touches a nerve. The whole country twists with anxiety, and Carter gets the blame.
Most people will tell you that they think Jimmy Carter is decent, honest, means well, hardworking, and all of that. But then many will say, but he's not competent, he can't do the job.
In New York, Hollywood could have reshot the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still.
The image of impotence came because I had emphasized the energy program so heavily throughout my first 2.5 years, and the Congress had not taken final action on it. I was equally frustrated and equally disturbed with the Congress, but instead of projecting it as a crucial need for our nation, the press coverage was primarily about a confrontation between me and the Congress, the disputes that continued, frustration, impotence, and so forth.
Since the 1973 embargo,
Jimmy Carter had no show business talent. Jimmy Carter came across as a dud on television.
Jimmy Carter did much better with a live audience, in a small room, one-on-one. One-on-one, he could convince you to sell your socks and shoes. Very impressive man. You put him on television, and he comes across very uncomfortably.
This period in Carter's presidency is called his crisis of confidence. But the way television portrays him, the title of this episode will be Carter's crisis of competence.
Good evening. It is rare indeed that an American president will acknowledge publicly and beforehand that a particular speech or event is a turning point for him. It simply makes the stakes too high for comfort. But that is exactly what President Carter has done, and it's an indication of how deeply he believes he's in trouble. His speech tonight from the Oval Office of the White House on energy, on leadership, and on what he describes as the national malaise could very well determine who governs this country for the next 4 years.
The press named it the malaise speech, but I never use that phrase.
Television reporters and television anchormen really do assume an omnipotence that is pretty dangerous.
Now, one at a time, and make certain it's not over a minute. I won't speak over a minute because my contract calls for me to speak for a minute or less. Tell me when you're rolling.
They're rolling anytime.
Mm-hmm. Take one. This is Sam Donaldson at the White House. Last night,
Start over.
Come on, Julia. Either they're rolling and you're ready.
They were rolling. I just moved slightly.
All right.
Stand up.
Julia, are you ready?
I'm ready. She just was telling me to frame for the slide.
Don't tell me anything else when I'm ready then. Okay.
The name of the game in television news is to get it on fast and to be able to get it on in short snippets. And therefore, in order for a television correspondent to get his story on, he looks for the most simplistic, controversial, contentious, melodramatic event to put on concerning the presidency.
He's in there with Ham. No one else I know of is at that meeting.
Yeah, they're in there with Ham and Coleman Young, and they're talking politics. But I just told Rick, they called me and said he's going to be in the campaign. It's illegal to talk about the campaign. Why is it illegal?
Well, this is not
These people are fools. Well, yes, but I've guided him off this business about the campaign. I think there's salt. Jesus. Coleman Young in there to talk about salt. Jesse Hill to talk about salt. Yeah.
Policy. He wouldn't
good God, yes. Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
Well, there you go.
All right, call him up. This is Sam Donaldson at the White House. Last night...
Well, it is a vicious circle. The more the people are told how bad the people think about somebody, the more they start thinking badly of them.
And the press is inherently responding to the public's interest, not in achievements but failures, not in cooperation but disagreements, not in consistency but inconsistency, not in successes but mistakes. So I think the inclination of the press is to publish interesting events that titillate the viewers or the readers or the listeners.
Now when you have come to the end of the way and find there's no more happiness for you, just let the thoughts turn back once more, if you will, to our little cabin home on the hill. Oh, someone has taken you from me and left me here all alone. Just listen to the rain beat on my window pane in our little cabin home on the hill.
And now, Act 1. Enter Senator Ted Kennedy. The whole machinery of the TV election gets underway when he walks across our TV screen. It's as though central casting has sent over to the networks the most charismatic and compelling character they can find. If Carter can't fill the bill, who can?
Under what circumstances could you be a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination?
Well, I have no, at the present time, clearly I am not.
When do you think you might make up your mind, Senator?
Well, I don't have any particular time frame or any particular time date.
By covering Kennedy so intensely, even before he says he's running, the networks create the reality of a campaign even when there is none.
In a political campaign, in our news judgment, we cover the campaign, those events that we consider important and indicative, illustrative of the nature of the campaign. I don't think any of those are media events that we cover. A media event, to my mind, would be a supermarket opening that a newspaper might cover because it had advertising interests involved. We don't cover media events at all.
And the networks create the reality of a campaign in another way. They take public opinion polls endlessly.
This week gives President Carter the lowest job approval rating ever recorded by pollsters who began asking job approval questions a quarter of a century ago.
Polls keep political coverage lively, just the way statistics keep baseball reporting lively. After all, you can't run a nightly sports program based on a once-a-year World Series. In the primaries that are made for TV, the three networks broadcast 290 news reports using poll data.
And they're up.
They conduct the polls themselves, so they can broadcast the results themselves. For instance, 1/2 of everything the CBS Evening News reports about this election is who's ahead or who's behind. The poll brings a TV reality to something that has no inherent reality. A poll is a media event in itself. And notice something else. The networks don't simply tell us about the polls. There's always someone standing by to assess, interpret, and explain, to divine the public will.
The consensus among political professionals here is that Edward Kennedy can have the Democratic presidential nomination
anytime he wants it.
A poll is just a snapshot of people's feelings at a given time. But when the results are reported, networks treat the polls as predictions of things to come. The prediction? A Kennedy challenge to Carter for the Democratic presidential nomination. But now the networks will turn the tables on the senator, twisting the plot and creating another one of network television's ironic and melodramatic self-fulfilling prophecies. It is November 4th, 1979, exactly 1 year to the day before the election, and just days before Kennedy officially announces that he will run for president. Kennedy is on our screens being interviewed by Roger Mudd.
Do you think, Senator, that anybody really will ever fully believe your explanation of the Chappaquiddick?
Well, the problem is from that night, I found the conduct and behavior almost sort of beyond belief myself. I mean, that's why it's been. But I think that's the way it was. That happens to be the way it was.
It turned out that Senator Kennedy was an absolute flop in that interview. He exposed himself as not having really thought through the issues, of being totally confused in the matter of the moral question and issues being placed before him because of Chappaquiddick. And this was reflected, obviously, in the reaction of the people to the interview. How in the world is this media responsible for that?
Later in the program, Roger Mudd portrays Kennedy as less than honest and sets forth his choices to the American people. Mudd tells us, here are the only ways we can consider Ted Kennedy.
So the American voter is left with three choices. One, that Kennedy's account of a tragic accident is believable and is therefore of no political consequence. Two, that Kennedy's account is not believable, but that knowing any other account could have ruined a career which since Chappaquiddick has become substantial, makes it an acceptable defect. Three, that Kennedy's account not only is a fabrication, but is also a major flaw that disqualifies him from the presidency.
In the 2 weeks following the CBS special, the rest of the media jump on the Chappaquiddick bandwagon. ABC, CBS News, the two Washington papers, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal all run features, editorials, interviews, and commentaries on Kennedy's personal life. These reports are devoid of what we think of as news. News, as the word implies, ought to be new. This was 10-year-old history rehashed and served up as news. But here is a gift for the networks. A chance to restate, again and again, one of the most titillating stories of our political history. It wasn't just rumor either. Chappaquiddick, though murky, had happened. The title of this multimedia extravaganza might have been Chappaquiddick Revisited. The Radio Act of 1927, a federal law, called for broadcast licensees to serve the public interest. But the broadcasters have often confused the public interest with the public appetite. The late Edward R. Murrow knew this clearly.
One of the basic troubles with radio and television news is that both instruments have grown up as an incompatible combination of show business, advertising, and news. This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and even it can inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box.
On the same day as the Kennedy interview with Roger Mudd, disturbing images are coming onto our screens via satellite.
Good evening. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran has been invaded and occupied by Iranian students. The Americans inside have been taken prisoner.
This is news, and TV's amplification and repetition of the hostage crisis would echo all through the campaign, long after Kennedy himself had left the stage.
Policewoman will be seen 45 minutes from now, so that we may bring you the following special program from ABC News.
Look at this. One American, blindfolded, handcuffed. Today, in the courtyard of the American Embassy in Tehran, he and 60-some others still held hostage and threatened in a country gone out of control. The pictures exclusive, as are so many more in this broadcast.
Exclusive, hot, saleable pictures. Iran is a country out of control and looks it. News, yes, but it also becomes the perfect media event. One crisis after another is staged for, even made for, TV. The Iranian students want TV coverage, and the networks are ready to give it to them. The director of this episode is the Ayatollah Khomeini, a man with an instinctive sense of drama, sharpened by the remarkable idea that if you went up against him, you went up against Allah himself. No wonder he can give the network show producers such remarkable photo opportunities. No wonder the networks rerun the file tapes on quieter days. And is it any wonder that demonstrations form spontaneously in front of the American embassy when network cameras keep showing up?
We've really not faced anything like that in our modern history, a situation in which something this dramatic is happening, and at the same time those who are the kidnappers, the terrorists, are allowing press coverage of what they're doing for the first month or so, almost on a daily sort of basis.
This is a TV drama that has all the power of allegory. You can't beat a good allegory to engage an audience. The forces of good and the forces of evil drawn up in battle. A black and white world in living color. And this is no mere miniseries. This piece of media magic runs for 444 days. It is such good television that one network actually spins off a new hit TV series around the hostage crisis. America Held Hostage.
This is an ABC News special. The Iran Crisis. America Held Hostage. From Washington, correspondent Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. The special report that we planned to bring you tonight was about domestic politics, the battle among the Democrats. But we think the crisis in Iran is more urgent right now than the campaign here at home.
Are you seriously asking me whether we tried to keep the hostage crisis going in order to put on a broadcast that would be commercially successful?
This picture tells it all. To the Iranian demonstrators who set fire to it, this was a symbol of victory.
What we learned is what we always knew, but had never been able to prove, was that the American people are willing to face reality at that hour of the night. I did those broadcasts, America Held Hostage. And I used to think, what an unenviable job this is. I'm sending them off to bed every night feeling bad.
America Held Hostage. It goes through the ratings roof. On its first night, it breaks Johnny Carson's hold on the 11:30 time slot with a Nielsen audience share of 29% of the total viewers watching, to Carson's 27%. Within a month, America Held Hostage is up to a 33% share. And by January 1980, it hits a 37% share. ABC is doing so well with the Crisis series that on the 142nd day of captivity, ABC institutionalizes the new show as a permanent program. Nightline.
This is a new broadcast in the sense that it is permanent and will continue after the Iran crisis is over.
And that's the way it is. Thursday, January 17th, 1980, the 75th day of captivity, the 138th day of captivity, the 257th day of captivity, the 366th day of captivity for the American hostages in Iran. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
No matter who is president or where he stands in the polls, a president can generally count on the American people rallying round to support him in a foreign crisis. That's what happens to Mr. Carter at the beginning of the hostage crisis. The president cancels his travel schedule and embargoes Iranian oil imports. He is perceived on television as presidential. Americans are waving the flag in the streets again, and they sympathize with the beleaguered president and this unsolvable, tragic problem. For a month, support for Carter holds firm. Other candidates criticized the president for failing to heed warnings that the embassy was in danger before the hostages were seized. But no candidate dares criticize the president's policies in dealing with the Ayatollah after the seizure. That would be unpatriotic, and the public reaction swift and negative. And then suddenly Kennedy is there on our TV screens with what appears to be an odd and shattering remark.
The Iran crisis jumped today into the middle of American presidential politics. That happened when President Carter's leading rival for the nomination, Senator Edward Kennedy, broke his month-long silence on the issue. Last night, he roundly criticized the U.S. relationship with the deposed Shah.
Ted tells us that our ally, the Shah, who has fled from our enemy, the Ayatollah, ran one of the most violent regimes in the history of mankind.
Ran one of the most most violent regimes in the history of mankind in the form of terrorism.
And had stolen billions of dollars.
Stay here with his umpteen billions dollars that he's stolen from Iran.
Was the senator siding with the Ayatollah? No. Let's examine what actually happened. Here's the part the networks didn't emphasize in their coverage. Ronald Reagan had made an offhand remark. Mr. Reagan suggested that since the Shah was one of our allies, why not give him permanent asylum in the United States? Kennedy's statement was in response to Mr. Reagan's suggestion. However, played out of context, Kennedy's statement sounded like a defense of the Ayatollah.
The uproar over Kennedy's comments today may prompt him to return to his former vow of silence on Iran. But it's clear that once this crisis ends, what happened and why will become a major issue in the campaign.
The next morning, the New York Post headline looked like this. After the so-called Shah blunder, Kennedy's support among Democrats falls 12 points in 12 days.
Kennedy's problem isn't just Iran. 1/5 of our Democrats said they wouldn't vote for him under any circumstances.
63% of Iowa's Democrats think President Carter tells the truth most of the time, but that only 39% think Kennedy does.
Ted Kennedy's campaign will never really recover from the effects of Chappaquiddick Revisited and the Shaw blunder. Kennedy drops and Carter gains nearly 40 points in 10 weeks. Born on network TV, Kennedy's campaign is now dying on network TV.
We're not in any way responsible for the conduct of the candidates. We're responsible only for reporting what the candidates do, holding up the mirror.
But is it that simple? Or does television sometimes hold up a funhouse mirror that distorts things? Take the case of the third Democratic candidate for president, California Governor Jerry Brown. In 1976, Brown defeated Carter in a series of primary elections. But in 1980, it is with ridicule that the networks deal with the elusive style of the California governor.
I offer myself as a candidate for the presidency.
And his campaign theme sounded a bit like the Boy Scout credo, a bit like the screenplay from Star Wars. And his standing in the polls continues to take the path of Skylab. And this weekend, Jerry Brown had to travel through Iowa in this DC-3, built in 1942, and looking like it came off the set of Casablanca.
The candidate who rarely tells jokes himself, but is frequently the butt of them.
Even months after Brown leaves the race, CBS reporter Bruce Morton cannot resist sticking Brown one last time.
Jerry Brown was the only candidate who spent money to appear on television with holes in his head. That made him hard to vote for, one viewer said.
The networks had helped axe a man of some intelligence and imagination simply by using the endless repetition of a character brought on for laughs and then dropped.
If we distorted that mirror, if we distorted the reports, if somehow or other we did not cover candidates who were being serious and discussing the issues while we covered only other candidates who were riding elephants and pushing peanuts by their nose or whatever, then I would say that we were influencing the campaign unduly and unfairly.
A well-known Iowa humorist, Ellis Parker Butler, once wrote a very successful short story called Pigs is Pigs. That was 75 years ago. Now candidates is candidates.
On the Republican side, 7 candidates audition at the Iowa caucuses for the part of president. In the made-for-TV election, Iowa replaces New Hampshire as the traditional primary kickoff, and the networks are programmed for lots of coverage. CBS alone would dedicate 49 minutes to Iowa on the evening news, more than any primary. On TV, popularity in the polls means access to airtime. It's like Hollywood's Q ratings, where the higher the Q, the bigger the box office. And as 1980 begins, Ronald Reagan is more popular than all the other Republican candidates combined. But the networks are having a problem with their Republican leading man. Ronald Reagan is making few personal appearances in Iowa, preferring to conduct his campaign on the national stage. Reagan is snubbing the network cattle call with his above-the-battle style, So Reagan gets the most airtime, more than any other Republican. But it is also the most negative.
It seems to me, interviewing you, that you're a lot more reasonable and humanistic than your press. Now, is it a condition of the Republican primary, or, I don't know, have you been locked into a role that people think you're this Neanderthal Republican, this hardline? I don't know.
Oh, I honestly believe that politics in recent years has come to be a case where the media, it's image building, and the media conceives of an image, and then you have to, everything you do and say has to fit that image.
Howard Baker and George Bush are running second and third in the Republican popularity polls. But four candidates, Congressman Phil Crane, Congressman John Anderson, John Connolly, and Robert Dole, are not household names. All had distinguished public careers, and now they are stretching to get their hands on this, the American megaphone. It is galling to these four proud and ambitious men when the networks cast them in cameo appearances. Candidate John Anderson, congressman from Illinois, put it this way.
I read one piece in the Globe this morning quoting one of the network executives as saying that they're going to have a certain kind of coverage on Baker next week that he hasn't had before. What do they call it? Doubling up? I don't know. I think that's the expression. I assume that means that they have crews on more than one candidate. A network has crews on more than one candidate simultaneously. But that they, for John Anderson and Jerry Brown, they were relying on zone coverage. Zone. If they happen to have somebody in the zone and you fly within the zone, then apparently their radar picks you up and you appear on the screen. Otherwise, your blip is, off the screen.
As the Iowa clash looms closer, the TV people start to let us see more of Howard Baker and George Bush, Reagan's principal challengers. Then, just a week before the caucuses, CBS's 60 Minutes presents George Bush to us in a glowing feature entitled George Who.
I first saw him on 60 Minutes, and that's what really interested me about him, is what I saw in there.
On the eve of the Iowa caucuses, the networks are giving George Bush the attention that would inevitably lead to real momentum.
It is commonly thought that the Bush organization is the superior one.
The networks tell us that Bush will do well in Iowa, maybe even pull off a big surprise upset victory over Reagan.
The presidential primaries.
George Bush's defeat of pre-caucus favorite Ronald Reagan was not by so big a margin, but perhaps was more surprising.
CBS had said that Bush's plurality would be 6,000 votes. In fact, Bush squeaks past Reagan by only 2,000 votes, a narrow 2% plurality. Nevertheless, TV exposure of Bush quadruples after his big surprise.
Iowa has set something in motion. The forward momentum is clearly established, and I am absolutely convinced I will be your next president.
In less than a month, Bush's popularity among Republicans nationally rises from 6 to 24%. Now watch as the network shift the scene to New Hampshire. Here they will be handed the best performance in Act 1, a real confrontation. And from long experience, they know exactly how to play it. Again and again and again.
Ronald Reagan said he was paying for the forum and everyone could play. John Breen of the Nashua Telegraph said the newspaper was sponsoring the forum and everyone couldn't play.
Let him speak, Mr. Breen.
Could you turn that microphone off, please?
This is Hitler. I am paying for this microphone.
Reagan grabbed the microphone and shouted at the moderator and said, "It's my microphone. I paid for it, Mr. Breen." He called him by his wrong name. And George Bush just sort of sat there looking kind of foolish.
The Great Debate, or the Great Silent Chorus Line, is the best political theater this state has seen since Edmund Muskie cried in the snow here 8 years ago.
Could you turn that microphone off, please?
I am paying for this microphone.
It was not the first time America had witnessed this scene.
Don't you shut me off. I'm paying for this broadcast. Don't cut him off. Give him a chance.
The debate itself gets lost by all three networks in the editing room. No issues, no nuclear policy, no energy crisis, no inflation. Instead, Reagan macho and Bush not so macho get played for a total of 17 minutes of airtime on the network news shows.
There is a vast amount of hokum and nonsense, baloney, involved in the American political scene. But I don't think that it is entirely show business.
Mr. Green. Would you turn that microphone off, please?
I am paying for this microphone.
But it's a television picture. It's a television story. It is difficult for us to resist the temptation to show the interesting. I haven't figured this out in my head yet.
You tend to become less introspective. You tend to become less reflective and to try to adopt a more simplistic, almost telegraphic style to make sure that you can get the punchline through in the time allotted.
But Bush doesn't have a punchline. He sits there quietly protesting that he is sticking to the debate rules, waiting for some sense to emerge from this sideshow. On election night, the networks carry the news that is the beginning of the end for Mr. Bush, and they even act surprised.
The presidential primaries.
This state has left a major mark on the presidential campaign and provided one big surprise in the process. That surprise, the huge proportions of Ronald Reagan's victory over George Bush.
Mr. Bush isn't the only candidate whose hopes fade in New Hampshire.
And Mr. Carter handed another damaging setback to Senator Edward Kennedy in Kennedy's own backyard.
As in the old vaudeville days, both George and Teddy have been given the hook. Too few votes, too little applause. And now what will it be? Just a predictable and long series of unexciting primaries leading to the inevitable Carter-Reagan contest? Who would watch? Oh, no. Let's talk a little practical showbiz here. If General Hospital can hype the ratings with an occasional new face, why can't the presidential newsmakers do the same? Re-entered John Anderson. Same man, new role. Network casting will make him a star. TV first noticed Anderson's performance at the Iowa debate. He spoke in snappy, attractive bursts, just right for television. They saw that he was telegenic and coherent. Since his Iowa performance, they have been quietly and subtly promoting him in his new role, waiting to see if TV audiences would respond. They do.
The Republican presidential candidate, once spoofed as the missing man of the campaign, now has been found. Here's the spoof and Jim McManus's report.
Anyone who has seen Congressman John B. Anderson, Republican of Illinois, please call 800-555-1221.
Anderson's emergence is not part of a conspiracy. It is part of a need. He is latched onto by old-fashioned commercial TV thinking. Cast as TV's maverick, Anderson gets a lot more than zone coverage. Listen to how they describe Mr. Anderson to us.
John Anderson often has found himself standing apart from the crowd in this campaign 80.
John Anderson's forthright style has increased his appeal with the voters.
And even though many voters see him as the most articulate, honest, and best candidate,
in a highly detailed study of CBS News coverage of Campaign 80 conducted by Dr. Michael Robinson of George Washington University, it was indeed John Anderson who was cast with the most positive image of all the candidates throughout the campaign. NBC and ABC coverage showed the same trends. In January and February of 1980, CBS characterized Anderson so favorably that he was almost off the chart. They gave Anderson more airtime than former Texas Governor John Connally, 3 times as much airtime as Congressman Philip Crane, and 6 times as much as Senator Robert Dole, with all of them leading Anderson in the popularity polls. As Anderson's star rises on the evening news, his popularity surges. In the New Hampshire primary, Anderson comes in 4th, but New Hampshire is just the beginning as John Anderson becomes a viable candidate via the TV news skyrocket.
Good evening. Campaign 80 took an abrupt turn tonight, just 6 weeks after the first votes were cast in Iowa. In Massachusetts and Vermont, a little-noticed candidate came out of nowhere to become a factor in the race for the Republican presidential nomination. John Anderson, the congressman from Illinois, well regarded by his colleagues, but little known to the public at large, emerged as one of the front-runners, jolting both Ronald Reagan and George Bush.
He finishes second in both the Vermont and the Massachusetts primaries, but the reviews are even better than the actual results.
Anderson finished so strongly, second in both primaries, that in the sometimes convoluted logic of politics, he's viewed as yesterday's big winner.
It was then that really our campaign burst into some prominence, and I began to be covered on a more regular basis.
We never expected anything like this.
John Anderson is back in his home state, cloaked in the symbols of a big-time candidate. Bigger crowds, bigger airplanes, Secret Service motorcades, and big money to back him. Yesterday alone, campaign mail produced $117,000.
Basking in the TV spotlight, Anderson's support in national popularity polls multiplies 20-fold in 2 months. Yet through all this, he has not won a single primary. Incredible. In a good drama, however, a winner must eventually win. In the made-for-TV election, Anderson's home state of Illinois will be his first real test.
John, you really would find Teddy Kennedy preferable to me?
Another debate melee. Only this time it's George Bush and other Republicans ganging up on John Anderson, painting him as too liberal to be in the Republican Party. And once again, according to the network reviews, Ronald Reagan manages to upstage everyone.
Many observers believe that if there was a winner, it was Reagan, who stayed above the fray, acting presidential while his rivals scrapped.
The Illinois primary. On the Republican side, that widely anticipated close challenge to Reagan by John Anderson in Illinois did not materialize.
Anderson, a big loser in his home state. But the networks can't quite give up on their colorful John Anderson story. They still need a wild card, a foil to keep the contest lively. If Anderson cannot win in his own party, why not recast him in yet another new role? Re-enter John Anderson.
For many voters who dislike the prospect of a November choice only between Reagan and Carter, John Anderson looms as a potential alternative.
Yes, I think we probably served their purpose by injecting an unknown factor in this otherwise two-man contest. How many votes would Anderson pull? Would they come from Carter? Would they come from Reagan? Would he advantage one candidate over the other? What effect, what influence will his votes have on the outcome?
John Anderson, well, kind of got the maverick image, and that helped sustain him for a time. It's a very great problem.
And now it is John Anderson, TV's maverick, as an independent candidate for the presidency. And win or lose, it is clear that network TV has done a lot better by John Anderson than most Republicans in the race. John Connally had been the governor of Texas and Secretary of the Treasury. Yet on CBS in 1980, he attracted only 490 seconds of campaign coverage. CBS presented to us one South Carolinian describing Connally as, quote, nothing but a Texas show horse who'd been gelded, close quote. Five-term Congressman Philip Crane received 290 seconds of CBS coverage in just 2 stories. One report in which he revised his campaign schedule, and another in which he failed to qualify for federal matching campaign funds. Senator Robert Dole had been Gerald Ford's running mate 4 years earlier. But on CBS in 1980, Dole was almost invisible, starring in only 205 seconds of coverage on the evening news. Most of that came, ironically enough, the day he announced he was withdrawing from the race. On the Democratic side, Jimmy Carter is winning a string of primaries and remaining in the White House.
I beg your pardon.
He claims that he is pinned down there by the endless hostage crisis and the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. He is refusing to attack his Democratic or Republican challengers, or to provide the networks with all the usual hoopla of a campaign.
The Rose Garden just outside the Oval Office is, of course, frozen and dormant now, but it is only a symbol anyway, a symbol of the politics of incumbency, scoring points and making news and approving federal grants and leading in the polls and winning elections without ever leaving the White House.
I am not going to resume business as usual as a partisan campaigner out on the campaign trail until our hostages are back here, free and at home.
So the big question hanging over the Carter White House is this: do American voters really not want their president campaigning and debating during a foreign crisis? Or do they simply think that Jimmy Carter is hiding in the Rose Garden?
By asking the question, Mr. Mudd makes the dramatic charge that the president is afraid to fight. And it is only a short step to the next dramatic charge. From some secret place in the White House, Mr. Carter is cynically manipulating hostage news as a political weapon.
The president's answer to Bonnie Sauter came early this morning. Eager to respond quickly and also to get the message out before the polls opened in Wisconsin, Mr. Carter invited camera crews into the Oval Office at 7:18 a.m.
The press subsequently decided that we had orchestrated that particular arrangement with President Bonnie Sauter to try to influence the primaries.
It's been called the Rose Garden campaign, Jimmy Carter's non-traveling bid for re-election. Ostensibly, it is dictated by concern about the hostages in Iran. But has it been above the fray of politics?
In its fourth investigative report on Carter's Rose Garden strategy, CBS tells viewers that Carter has timed virtually all of his decisions in 1980 to coincide with the primary election calendar.
The next day is primary day in Wisconsin and Kansas. In the morning, before the polls open, he holds an Oval Office news conference.
The fact is that the primary that was held that day in Wisconsin, I believe, I was running 2-1 ahead of Kennedy in that primary anyway.
The president wins both primaries and also wins easily in Louisiana.
And as soon as we were convinced of the facts, I divulged those facts to the American people. We had no idea about, no concern for, no plans for there to be any political connotations to it.
Leslie Stahl, CBS News, with the Carter campaign at the White House.
Now, Carter's coverage gets even worse.
This is a CBS News special report. The rescue that failed.
This was a tragic loss, but the loss may not be limited to lives. At stake in this mission was American prestige. It will be a while yet before we know the full score there. At stake also was the Carter administration's credibility with both the Congress and the country's allies, both of whose strong support is needed to win this diplomatic war against Iran. But there is at least a lurking suspicion by both these groups that they were double-crossed by President Carter.
At the White House, a spokesman...
Not even the sitting president can put up with this kind of static from all three networks. Carter leaves the Rose Garden, and finally the networks are able to produce an election in which the entire cast is active, back in combat and making the news which they can edit and present to the world. This is more like it.
A wondrous victory tonight. Thank you very much.
Act 2. Let's take a look at the made-for-TV conventions, the great multi-million-dollar World Series of network news extravaganzas. Each of the three big networks will send 600 reporters, technicians, and support troops, and they will spend $50 million to cover the national political conventions. The parties will spend $12 million to create them. And in 1980, at the Republican National Convention in Detroit, with Reagan's nomination assured on the first ballot, NBC's John Chancellor openly laments the monumental task that lays before him.
For the first time in my life, I'm beginning to think that maybe we shouldn't cover these things gavel to gavel. That we have always prepared for gavel to gavel coverage, and because we never knew how the story would turn out. And here we know how the story is going to turn out.
The networks will be faced with a special problem. Millions spent on electronic wizardry, an all-star network cast, thousands of extras. But there isn't any hard news. They will have to fill time for 3 days. The networks will have to generate a dramatic story to sustain interest. What will it be? The only unanswered question is, who will be Reagan's running mate? Polls show that the most popular ticket will be Reagan and former President Gerald Ford. Mr. Ford is the first person in history to become vice president and president without being elected to either job. Perhaps the idea of actually being elected to a national office will appeal to him. The networks call it a marriage made in heaven. Actually, it was made by TV, for TV. They call it the dream ticket. Watch how the dream unfolds.
Gerald Ford is the man whom the polls say would most help Ronald Reagan as his running mate.
But the former president has said no, no, 1,000 times no, which in politics can mean maybe.
But the question was, had Reagan offered the job to Mr. Ford?
No, I just wanted his consultation and help in the decisions I have to make.
But the candidate confirmed that he wasn't finished yet.
I still haven't made a decision.
The major fascination tonight is the big guessing game. Who will be Reagan's running mate? This convention city abounded today with reports of concerted efforts to overcome former President Ford's reluctance and persuade him to take that number 2 spot. More on the prospects of a Reagan-Ford so-called dream ticket from Dan Rather. Dan?
Walter, here's what's happening. Ronald Reagan was groping for a running mate. Henry Kissinger was trying desperately to be Secretary of State in a new administration. Gerald Ford, having tired a bit of playing golf and making speeches to Rotary clubs and the like, was kind of saying to himself, you know, could be a role for me. Even yet, I'm still a young man.
If you needed any convincing that the party wants you, needs you, feels that it is your duty to answer a call, what would happen if they got out there on that floor tonight or tomorrow and said, it's got to be Gerald Ford?
I would not go to Washington, Walter, and be a figurehead vice president. If I go to Washington, and I'm not saying that I am accepting, I have to go there with the belief that I will play a meaningful role across the board in the basic and the crucial and the important decisions that have to be made in a 4-year period.
Now, these people got in rooms away from where anyone could see them and started talking in terms of, well, maybe, just maybe we could put Gerald Ford on the ticket. It would assure election for us. Wasn't anything altruistic in Ronald Reagan considering Gerald Ford as running mate. It was, we want to win the election.
Now, here again is Walter Cronkite.
Well, let's bring you up to date on the hottest story at the Republican convention in Detroit right now. It is that Ronald Reagan has asked former President Ford to be his running mate, but President Ford has not said yes. It would mean a co-presidency, in effect.
Walter, some grist for the rumor mill. We just talked with a member of the Reagan Political Operations Group who has been working the floor here, and he said to me, the deal has been made. I said, what deal? And he said, the deal between Governor Reagan and former President Ford. Walter, I've been told by 2 people very close to George Bush that it is their opinion that George Bush was told a few moments ago that he is not going to be Ronald Reagan's vice presidential running mate.
Walter, the Ford story has been confirmed about as officially as it can be here on the floor. A major leader of the conservative wing of the Republican Party, a man who's got a great deal of concern about who is going to be the vice presidential candidate, has received a call from Reagan headquarters saying that the arrangement has been made and that it will be announced.
Walter, I'll tell you, if you can't get interested in this story, you're dead behind the eyes. I'll tell you that. Because here's what apparently is happening, and this comes from the best source that I personally have had all day long, that Governor Reagan had contacted Gerald Ford this evening, and that Governor Reagan had met most of what Gerald Ford had asked for. The operative word there may be most. And that Ronald Reagan had said to Gerald Ford that he'd like to have his answer within the half hour because he would, if the answer is yes, come to the hall tonight. And I believe, Walter, that we can bank it that that's exactly the situation.
Let's take a look at the dream ticket. It is TV's need for a storyline in a predictable convention that has promoted it in the first place. The whole episode is rumor, speculation, hot air, with the flames of suspense fanned by uninformed network stars walking around the convention floor and plugged into the whole nation as they talk to equally uninformed delegates. When the news is generally slack and you've sold millions of dollars worth of commercials and committed millions to the latest gee-whiz technology, the razzmatazz of speculation is a lot more entertaining than the jerky, spasmodic development of facts. The dream ticket. Once it is exposed to the delegates on, of all places, TV, it becomes a bad dream.
I've never dissented more emphatically from anything in my life than I dissent from the notion that this is a dream ticket. It would be a dream ticket until midnight Thursday in this arena. As of that moment, it turns into the nightmare ticket. And I mean this during the campaign and in the event of a Reagan election, because you cannot have but one Mr. President in any administration. You can't have but one presidential nominee in a campaign.
I think that CBS here was the medium through which this deal was attempted to be cut, and it strikes me that if Ronald Reagan does this, he severely weakens himself going into the campaign as a man of presidential weight.
Were just called off the floor into the trailer, and somebody came running up to me, one of the top lieutenants from the trailer. He said that Reagan is here to tell the convention it's Bush. I'm sorry, I can't get to a second person to get it confirmed, but they just came running over to me, shouted at me, said, go with it, it's absolutely true.
Leslie Stahl, that's the most amazing piece of news we've heard since we heard it was Ford. Now, hold on just a second. Who told you that?
Walter, a top lieutenant just came and said, it's not Ford. They're coming all around me to tell me it's not Ford. Someone told me it was Bush. They said it's absolutely definite. Go with it. They're all yelling Bush all around me. Everybody's yelling Bush, Walter. Bush? They're telling me Bush, Walter. Reagan lieutenants, men with colored hats all around, telling me Bush.
Well, they better bring the adrenaline up here to the anchor booth. Okay, Leslie, we'll wait developments. Well, who's writing the script for this one? That's what I want to know.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that I am breaking with precedent to come here tonight, but in watching at the hotel the television and seeing the rumors that were going around and the gossip that was taking place here, I felt that it was necessary to break with tradition, just as probably in this campaign we're going to break with tradition a lot of times. And I am recommending to this convention that tomorrow, when the session reconvenes, that George Bush be nominated.
The fact that television dealt with it before the decision was made, got out the information that what they were considering, it was a very large factor in the end in it not happening. Because I think many delegates began talking among themselves, saying, are they serious about this? One would say to the other, and then another would say, well, yeah, you know, the information is now clear. Kissinger and others are in there talking, and Ford is, he's inclined perhaps to do it if he can get what he wants, and Reagan's inclined to do it, and it was, in the end, part of what killed the idea was any number of people began coming to Reagan saying, listen, if you're serious about this Ford thing, forget it. I don't think that's a very good idea. That's what killed it.
The networks know as early as April that the Democratic convention in August is destined to be nothing more than a recoronation of Jimmy Carter. 4 days of the humdrum machinations of the party process itself. But then Ted Kennedy gives the networks another gift. No longer having a shot at wresting the nomination from Carter, Kennedy pledges to fight all the way to the convention for Carter delegates. This promises to provide the networks with a divisive and colorful battle to overturn the verdict of the primaries. But once again, the networks must be creative. The deposed Kennedy will have to be recast in a dramatic new role. With a cool shift in emphasis, the man who had been reviled, cast as the tragically flawed third brother, is now resurrected as the gallant loser. The tarnish of his armor is now overlooked. Television doesn't lie, but it does bend the truth in order to create these wonderful moments. They go back far into the file tape, several months into the storage bin, to find this scene that will bolster the new Kennedy image.
If he's proved anything in his 7 months of nonstop campaigning, Kennedy's proved himself a man not easily discouraged. Michigan last April, a biting wind, driving sleet, no overcoat. But the sight of a few more possible votes at the fence was enough for Kennedy to brave it all, whirl himself and his gargantuan press corps around and greet the folks.
Kennedy is clearly the star of the network convention shows, the valiant, noble hero, the warrior who has faced enormous odds.
For me, a few hours ago, this campaign came to an end. For all those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die.
And watch how, when the President of the United States appears to accept the nomination, it is played by TV as an anticlimax.
I reach out to you tonight, and I reach out to all those who supported you in your valiant and passionate campaign. Ted, your party needs, and I need you.
On what should be Carter's most triumphant day of the year, he is cast as an embattled and lackluster loser. When Carter's victory balloons fail to drop on cue, all three networks instantly point out this symbol of the failed Carter presidency, as if to prophesy his impending doom. And when Kennedy joins Carter at the podium,
it does all look kind of backwards, though, doesn't it, Frank? It's almost as though the man who lost is waiting on the platform for the man who won.
On television, Carter, the winner, is being portrayed as the loser. And since this is the only way that millions upon millions of Americans see the convention, the president as loser is surely an idea that might stick in the public mind and heart.
Senator Kennedy leaves the stand. He's quite sober, unsmiling. There will be no pictures in tomorrow morning's papers, and none for posterity, of Ted Kennedy holding Jimmy Carter's hand aloft.
Act 3 of the great TV drama, The Made-for-TV Election. It's time now for the television performers to descend upon the chosen candidate performers, Mr. Carter, Mr. Reagan, and the man with his own political party, Mr. Anderson.
Be patient on the long one. That's it. You ready? This is going to sound like Spike Jones.
Orange. Good morning, all.
Good morning, Sheriff.
We've got to go. It's 8:45. We're running this Morning.
All right. Morning. Morning. Nice to see the choral group in such fine fettle.
On the road again. Just can't wait to get on the road again.
On the Road Again, the unofficial Reagan campaign theme song, instills a feeling of camaraderie on the zoo plane.
On the road again. Going places that I've never been.
Hundreds of reporters, technicians, and media stars stuffing facts in a bag, writing history on the fly, for better or worse.
Why are you willing to talk to me? Why are you not more uptight?
Well, because why does a preacher speak to a sinner?
Am I a sinner?
No.
On the road again.
20-hour days run into weeks of endless streams of adrenaline, cocktails, carbohydrates, and nicotine.
Life I love is making music with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again.
A unity of experience forces a unity of perception for the pack, focused by frequent deadlines to be met. And since the evening news has little time to explain complex issues, it is the personalities of the candidates that will make the election pivotal. The search for gaffes and foibles is on. However, Mr. Reagan's campaign people are just as skilled in the art of oversimplification. They understand what television understands, that people will love the image of the Gipper standing amidst the ruins not only of the South Bronx, but also the ruins of Mr. Carter's broken promises.
I didn't come down here to make a promise. I came down here because somebody else made a promise.
Then Ronald Reagan does something that not even his advisors are expecting. He departs from the script, and the media event comes alive. The crowd, already hostile, creates a chance for some mighty effective street theater starring Ronald Reagan right on television.
I am trying to tell you that I know now there is no program or promise that a president can make that the federal government can come in and wave a wand and do this. I can't do a damn thing for you if I don't get elected.
And it's a smash. But the media decide that Mr. Reagan's tendencies to depart from his scripts are political gaffes that make great TV.
One of the biggest problems in the campaign thus far has been that Reagan's senior staff just can't always control him. They wrote an offer of arms control negotiation into the national security speech, but it was Reagan himself who inserted the line on the Vietnam War that grabbed everybody's attention.
Well, it's time that we recognized ours was in truth a noble cause.
These vignettes are soon being played as very substantial foibles.
Good evening. It was just an offhand remark in a campaign speech. Ronald Reagan said yesterday of President Carter, he's opening his campaign down in the city that gave birth to and is the parent body of the Ku Klux Klan.
In Dallas, where he was to speak to fundamentalist Christians, Reagan was asked if he believed in the theory of evolution.
I have a great many questions about it. I think that recent discoveries down through the years have pointed up great flaws in it.
Actually, Ronald Reagan is expressing his true beliefs. But TV coverage portrays the Republican nominee as a ham-handed blunderer who has to be programmed. Ronald Reagan is shown as having about the same grasp of factual detail as America's best-known and loved buffoon.
And when a world gets population enough, you got enough people in the world to make armies, then God sent down a word that they could invent a gun. And I think that German preacher Martin Luther made the first.
It didn't take the networks long to balance their buffoon characterization of Mr. Reagan with a negative view of Mr. Carter. In our made-for-TV parlance, this is known as equal negative time.
Good evening. President Carter, at a White House news conference today, found himself questioned repeatedly about the level of his election campaign, specifically about his charge that hate and racism have been injected into the race.
Do you think that Reagan is running a campaign of hatred and racism? And how do you answer allegations that you are running a mean campaign?
No, I do not think he's running a campaign of racism or hatred. And I think my campaign is very moderate in its tone.
Accused him of interjecting the Ku Klux Klan into the campaign.
The only thing that I said Governor Reagan injected into the campaign was the use of the words states' rights in a speech in Mississippi.
Here's what Mr. Carter actually said.
You've seen in this campaign the stirrings of hate and the rebirth of code words like states' rights in a speech in Mississippi and a campaign reference to the Ku Klux Klan relating to the South. That is a message that creates a cloud on the political horizon. Hatred has no place in this country. Racism has no place in this country.
Mr. Carter is reacting to Mr. Reagan's use of the phrase states' rights, a code word for the maintenance of white supremacy in the old days of legally sanctioned racial segregation. But the networks do not carry the substance of this. There is no analysis of what the phrase means to Southerners like Carter. They simply portray Carter as mean, unfairly attacking his opponent. First, TV portrayed Carter as an incompetent, then as the cynical manipulator, and now he is cast as downright mean.
Mr. President, in recent days, you have been characterized as mean, vindictive, hysterical, and on the point of desperation.
Well, those characterizations are not accurate.
But they go on anyway. Carter's alleged meanness is the fourth most covered issue on CBS in September, getting as much attention as the faltering economy. On this issue, the sitting president has become a sitting duck, and so he thinks it best to apologize.
No more name calling.
I'll do my best.
Bizarre, but it plays. The networks appear to be giving substantial insight into Mr. Carter's wicked ways, the same way the producers of Dallas do.
There's only room for one king of the hill around here, Catherine. And I'm it.
As the campaign surges through September and into October, a foreign visitor looking at the American presidential race on television would get a wonderfully strange view. Vying for the presidency of the world's greatest democracy were a buffoon and a meanie.
Is this the way the diagram was?
I don't know. Who's Barbara down the other end?
Barbara the other end?
You down here.
It is October 28, 1980, 1 week to the day before the election. The networks focus the national spotlight on Cleveland, Ohio, where 2,000 media people converge in one room to watch TV. And as many as 100 million Americans will tune in for this single episode, the great presidential debate. A televised presidential debate can shift more votes than any other single event. And in 1980, with the election only 7 days away and the networks calling the contest a dead heat, this debate is seen as a chance for Ronald Reagan or Jimmy Carter to win the election with one knockout punch. Tonight, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan are ready. The pollsters have already dissected the American psyche. They've audience-tested themes and messages and told their candidates what America wants to hear. They've written the script for the great debate of 1980. The staffs of the two camps have prepared briefing books that synthesize the campaign's political intelligence. The books detail word by word and theme by theme what the candidates should say in the debate. It is the popularity of an answer and not its accuracy that scores points for a debater. The winner of the debate will be the candidate who best articulates what viewers already believe. In fact, the great presidential debate is something like a political version of the TV game show Family Feud.
It's time for the Family Feud. On your marks, let's start the Family Feud.
100 people surveyed. You got to try and get the most popular answer, and here's the question.
Arms control. I had a discussion with my daughter Amy the other day before I came here to ask her what the most important issue was. She said she thought nuclear weaponry.
Up there. 100 people surveyed. You got to try and get the most popular answer, and here's the question.
The Consumer Price Index.
Yes, you can lick inflation by increasing productivity and by decreasing the cost of government to the place that we have balanced budgets and are no longer grinding out printing press money, flooding the market with it because the government is spending more than it takes in. And my economic plan calls for that.
Carter's briefing book, his script, told Carter that he could win if he increased concerns about Reagan's readiness to use military force.
I think habitually, Governor Reagan has advocated the injection of military forces into troubled areas, when I and my predecessors, both Democrats and Republicans, have advocated resolving those troubles and those difficult areas of the world peacefully, diplomatically, and through negotiation.
Carter's briefing book also said that Reagan would win if he showed compassion and concern for people.
I have seen 4 wars in my lifetime. I'm a father of sons. I have a grandson. I don't ever want to see another generation of young Americans bleed their lives into sandy beachheads in the Pacific or rice paddies and jungles in Asia or the muddy, bloody battlefields of Europe.
In the briefing book, Carter was told that he could win if he could hurt Reagan on his record as governor of California.
In California, I'm surprised Governor Reagan brought this up, he had the 3 largest tax increases in the history of that state under his administration. He more than doubled state spending while he was governor, 122% increase, and had between a 20 and 30% increase in the number of employees.
Our spending in California increased less per capita than the spending in Georgia while Mr. Carter was governor of Georgia in the same 4 years. The size of government increased only 1/6 in California of what it increased in proportion to population in Georgia.
Immediately following the debate, ABC News asked viewers who won. For a 50-cent charge, viewers can call in their instant preference. This wonderfully unscientific poll gives ABC a flashy chance to make news and beat the competition with the highly valued first poll. An unscientific poll, inaccurate, meaningless. But first, it is a brilliant show business gimmick. And while ABC News is tallying the vote, it presents ABC News commentator George Will complimenting Reagan on his performance. It is now known, of course, that Carter's briefing book had fallen into the hands of the Reagan campaign and was used to rehearse Reagan in a mock debate. Just the day before, George Will had stepped out of his role as journalist, saw the stolen Carter briefing book, and helped coach Reagan for the debate. Later on television, reporter George Will fails to report the news of the stolen campaign document and also fails to tell ABC viewers about his special interest in the events under discussion that night.
George, it's my understanding that you met for some time yesterday with Governor Reagan, and I'm just wondering what you know of his game plan and how you think his game plan worked out tonight.
I think his game plan worked well. I don't think he was particularly surprised.
The great presidential debate, the high point of the made-for-TV election, is rigged. While the media occupy themselves with this dubious question of who won, they all miss the scoop of the year. Along with George Will at the Reagan debate rehearsal had been Congressman David Stockman. Stockman actually played Carter in the mock debate using Carter's briefing book. In Cassopolis, Michigan, at a luncheon the day of the debate, Stockman couldn't resist bragging, quote, "I just spent the weekend as Carter. That's why I'm so disoriented," close quote. He told about playing Carter using what he called, quote, "a pilfered copy of a briefing book Carter is going to use." What was the most serious act of political espionage since Watergate to the networks was a non-story. The morning after the great debate, the Elkhart, Indiana Truth carries the story of David Stockman's role-playing with stolen presidential documents. Oddly enough, no network reports it, even though it is hard to think of a hotter or more dramatic story to get them through the last 6 days. In the made-for-TV election, the battle is not one of ideas, but a battle to get 20 seconds on the evening news every night.
I don't understand why 52 Americans have been held hostage for almost a year now.
As you well know, and I see a few carriers out here in the audience, Republicans have a habit of spreading a lot of horse manure around right before an election.
It was a biting, slashing attack on Reagan, full of ridicule. And whereas yesterday the president said the hostage issue should not become a political football, today Mr. Carter himself was clearly the one doing the kicking.
What did Calcali say?
An interview with a Stockholm newspaper said that he expects the debate to end tomorrow, and he supports the release of the hostages if the U.S. will promise not to meddle in Iranian affairs and give over the spare parts. We know the way the war with Iraq will be lost without those spare parts.
Calcali says the hostages ought to be released as long as we return the spare parts. Carter said, "I will not comment until I have seen that report." And someone said, "Well, are you more optimistic?" And he said, "I really will have nothing more to say. If that fits, we can feed that someplace if you're doing an Iran section." And I don't have a clear grasp of how important that Calcali interview is anyway.
In the closing days of the made-for-TV election, the long-running hostage melodrama, America Held Hostage, surges onto the nation's TV screens. Once again, we see the familiar directorial hand of the Ayatollah.
Good evening. Two major news stories are converging this evening. Americans prepare to choose a president on Tuesday. And Iran, well aware of our elections, is increasing its indications that the American hostages will soon be returned.
Throughout the fall campaign, television has told us about Reagan's prediction of an October surprise. Network polls show that 1/3 of likely voters believe that Carter is using the hostages for political purposes. Will the hostages somehow be the basis of the surprise?
Washington Secretary of State Muskie today rejected any inference that President Carter, for political reasons, has orchestrated a hostage release deal with Iran.
For President Carter, a no-win situation is developing. The intense network drama is portraying him as manipulative if the hostages are released, and as impotent if he fails to win their freedom by Election Day. The extent of the network coverage is unparalleled in television history. The hostage crisis began in 1979, but in 1980 alone, the three networks broadcast over 1,000 stories on the evening news. 72 hours before the election, with the race still too close to call, the hostage crisis dominates the news, haunting the presidential campaign as it has all year. It is now Sunday, November 2nd, and with the election just 2 days away, one of the most dramatic shifts in public opinion ever recorded in the final week of a presidential campaign is about to take place.
President Carter, his motorcade, arriving at Air Force One in Chicago early this morning. Mr. Carter awakened by U.S. officials and informed about the latest developments in Tehran. The president interrupting his re-election campaign and returning to Washington. What the Iranian parliament approved this morning were those 4 conditions as set forth by the Ayatollah last month in connection with the release of the hostages. But there is no indication, repeat, no indication as to when the hostages might be released.
Now stay tuned for Meet the Press.
What I really resent is the ability of a foreign nation, and in this case the Ayatollah, to possibly affect the election of the President of the United States.
Good evening. Late today, President Carter delivered a statement on the Iranian hostage crisis from the White House.
I wish that I could predict when the hostages will return. I cannot.
Carter's polling now shows that Reagan has moved to a 5-point lead over Carter, but the network polls still show the race as too close to call.
Ronald Reagan, you're the one, sure to get the big job done.
On the campaign trail, Reagan refuses comment on the rapidly changing situation in Iran. He continues to articulate the basic themes of his campaign, and television shows him acting presidential.
I know that as we meet here 2 days before we go to the polls, that we all have on our minds the matter of the hostage situation in Iran. But let me say, this is not the time or place for me to be addressing such a sensitive matter. Obviously, all of us want this tragic situation resolved. That's my deepest hope, and I know it's yours.
Do you think the hostages are going to be released before Election Day?
I think there's a chance. There's so much going on.
How is that going to impact on the election?
I think it could help Carter. Unfortunately, Election Day is the first anniversary, 1 year.
On the night before the election, the campaign seems suspended in air. Which of the images broadcast by television during the past year will the voters bring with them into the voting booth?
And I have no reading since the events of this morning.
It's a song that might have been written for these times. Now the whole damn bus is cheering, and I can't believe I see 100 yellow ribbons round the old oak tree.
It was America Held Hostage Revisited.
The American people, for the first 8 or 10 minutes of the evening news, relived all of a terribly frustrating, humiliating year. The mobs were in front of the embassy again. Our diplomats were being paraded around in a humiliating fashion. Sort of scruffy little Iranian militants were taunting the country and the people of the United States.
Did not our president say that the hostage situation was a tremendous crisis which prevented him from participating in the process about 9/10 of the way through the primaries? Did he not come on the television the morning of the Wisconsin primary to record a hopeful development? It seems to me that the president has emphasized the issue, and I think we have just reflected his emphasis. I don't think we created it. The fact that the situation occurred at all, I think it is certainly legitimate to question the competence of the president in not taking proper precautions against an eventuality that he was warned about, that is, that hostages might be taken. As far as I can make out, they accepted the assurance of the Bakhtiar government, which was then in the process of collapsing, that our property and people would be protected. On the other hand, the president didn't start World War III over it. He didn't bomb anything. There was the rescue mission, which failed, as we know, which somehow liberated him from his obsession with it. I'm not clear how. Then you think, well, if Ronald Reagan had been in the White House, would he have been patient and forbearing? Would he have sent troops, which seems to have been his suggested solution in a number of other situations, which have, in fact, have yielded to diplomacy and patience and all those other undramatic qualities.
The Iranian crisis, the hostage situation, became intermingled with American politics, not by our choice, but by the choice of the president. When Mr. Carter decided to adopt his Rose Garden strategy, which was patently political, how could we have avoided it? How could we have not treated it, you know, in that regard? Right in the middle of a political campaign. So I think there were some bad things done in retrospect. But the worst thing that was done, I believe, and maybe this doesn't go to your question, but I think the worst thing that was done was the decision of President Carter to adopt that Rose Garden strategy to say that he would not go out and campaign until the hostages were released. That tied it right into American politics, and that surely must have encouraged the Iranians.
This is Bob Dyke in London. This morning, the militants gathered in a mosque a few miles north of the embassy to receive their instructions from the Ayatollah Khomeini. It is a correct move, he told his followers, to delegate the issue to the government. By issue, Khomeini meant the hostages. He praised the militants for having seized the embassy last November, saying it proved a small nation can humiliate a great power and get away with it.
That became, in many ways, a symbol for many other things that people were upset about, that they wanted to do something about by the first part of next week, whether we could or not.
That really brought back to the American people, it was a metaphor in a sense, it brought back to the American people, I think, all the frustrations that they had with Jimmy Carter. At the same time, all Ronald Reagan had to say was,
are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Put the two together, and the American people got the message.
Governor Reagan, during the campaign, had a great ability as an actor, as a communicator, to present things in a simple way, which is very attractive. Because when people are frustrated or when they are doubtful, when the world situation seems to be pressing upon them in an insoluble fashion with problems, and then you have a major candidate who says, this is all very simple, I've got the answer, and here it is in a phrase, that's politically attractive. And I think to that extent, his comments were very effective. You know, when somebody claimed the ability to reduce taxes by hundreds of billions of dollars, increase defense spending by hundreds of billions of dollars, and at the same time balance the budget, to me it seemed like a fairy tale or ridiculous. But Governor Reagan claimed these things to people, and apparently the press believed him, and it was only a year or so after he became president and actually put these promises into effect that the consequences of so-called Reaganomics became evident.
And that's the way it is. Monday, November 3rd, 1980, the 366th day of captivity for the American hostages in Iran. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
Following Carter's final campaign stop in Seattle, Carter learns that the bottom has fallen out. His polling shows that Reagan is now beating him by 10 points, a shift of nearly 9 million votes in 72 hours. At 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on election night, all three networks begin to call the contest based on the exit interviews they have been taking all day. No poll had yet closed, nor a single vote officially counted.
Good evening. Even with the polls still open across the country in this presidential election, there was the smell of victory in the air for Republican Ronald Reagan. The three television networks each poll voters as they leave polling places in randomly selected precincts, and all three of the networks showed substantial leads for Reagan.
In the key states all around the country, we believe Ronald Reagan will win a very substantial victory tonight.
Polls are still open in New York City and in most states west of the Mississippi as the first official network projection is announced.
Well, the time has come. You've seen the map. We've looked at the figures, and NBC News now makes its projection for the presidency. Reagan is our projected winner. Ronald Wilson Reagan of California, a sports announcer, a film actor, a governor of California, is our projected winner at 8:15 Eastern Standard Time on this election night.
Debate begins immediately over whether these early election projections have reduced voter turnout.
I think that as long as the polls have closed anywhere in the United States, we should go ahead and report that the polls have closed in those places and the results of that. I don't think this is television's responsibility. It is society's responsibility, the political organization's responsibility.
I have to say that sounds a little bit arrogant, because it is possible that there could be an accommodation here which would not be in any way jeopardize the freedom of the press, but would, I think, honor what is, I think, a legitimate feeling on the part of people that they don't want to have their vote discounted by having those projections in their ears before they get to the polling place.
Map, Ohio, Oklahoma, Virginia, it is beginning to look like, well, the word is landslide. The word is landslide. But we're not going to be able to sit here and suppress information that we have. It won't work. I mean, all the good intentions in the world will simply go down the drain. Somebody will break that kind of self-imposed embargo. And we're not going to sit here and be statesmanlike and let the rest of the other networks go ahead and do something else. We're tired of that. I'm personally tired of it.
With the polls still open, word spreads to people waiting in line to vote. Poll watchers begin to see voters turning away from the voting booths, going home without voting. Voters in the polling places aren't the only ones to hear about the network's Reagan landslide.
There is an Associated Press story from the White House tonight that indicates that President Carter is ready to concede the election to Ronald Reagan.
I got the story, I broke it. It's not my decision to be socially responsible or irresponsible. I'm a reporter. I knew I had a story. I filed it.
And we had no control over Carter. If Carter decided to make the concession, he made it early.
That I would never lie to you.
He made it on the basis of evidence that turned out to be quite accurate. And I don't think that that really had an impact on people around the country. If it did, it's the people's fault.
We are so deliberately cautious about the small number of votes that there are, not wanting to project Ronald Reagan as the winner of the presidential race.
Yes.
But it's been done. I mean, the president, we hear, is preparing his own concession statement, and it occurs to me that what we've got now is not just a landslide that was in the making, but a landslide. We've got to remember the polls are still open on the West Coast.
Yes.
Folks are just going to start voting like crazy, I think, for Reagan. And what we may have at the end of all of this is the biggest landslide we've seen in years.
President, of the hostage is out.
Can't say yes.
Not yet. Not yet. Is that what he said, Frank? I couldn't hear it.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. They've cheated him. They've cheated him right down to the end.
January 20th, 1981, day 444 of the Iranian hostage crisis and day one of the Reagan presidency. The network's long-running made-for-TV series, America Held Hostage, is coming to a climax simultaneously with the conclusion of network television's longest-running political extravaganza, the made-for-TV election.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
So television was doing what it has always done, and once again made these two stories one story. Television, simultaneously displaying the images of the transfer of the hostages and the peaceful transfer of power, instilled a sense of national renewal, which made this day in the minds of millions of television viewers, and in the words of Walter Cronkite, one of the great dramatic days in American history.
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, January 20th, 1981. A day that began as the 444th day of captivity and ended as the first day of freedom for the American hostages in Iraq. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, reporting from Washington. Good night.
And that's the way it was in 1980. And in 1984? And what about 1988? If you're anything like me, I'm sure you're left with a lot of questions. Is this the best way for this nation to conduct the most important event in its national life? Can network TV be trusted with such political power when its imperatives are entertainment and marketing? Everybody in this TV election, the candidates, the anchorman, the writers, the producers, the directors, all were putting on a TV show. The election on television became the TV election. The debate on television became the TV debate. Yes, and even the candidates on television became the TV candidates. TV is the new political process. The old way is no more, and I don't know if that's good or bad. But I do know that the commercial imperatives of the network seem to come before the national interest. Do we want stagecraft or statecraft? Do we want the greatest show on earth, or do we want the greatest nation on earth? The political process is our solemn responsibility, not the network's, and we can change it. Something can be done. We can require public affairs programming be truly public. We can require that candidates get real time for their views and not just time for one-liners. We can take the show business out of national politics. And tonight, perhaps, we've begun. Because now at least we're aware, and knowledge is freedom. We have options. The made-for-TV election was only the way TV said it was, and that's not the way it has to be, Walter. Thank you. Good night.